LinkedIn is pretty great at a lot of things, like helping you tap into the latest trends and insights in your field. We cannot stop your coworker from tapping her pencil. LinkedIn can help you find new jobs that align with your career goals. We cannot help you find the source of that weird smell in the office fridge. Ew. And while we can't stop your coworkers from bringing their hobbies into the office, LinkedIn can help you bring your career to the next level. LinkedIn is the network that works for you.
Experience a membership that backs your business journey with American Express Business Platinum. When you pay with membership rewards points for all or part of an eligible flight booked with a qualifying airline through Amex Travel, you can get 35% of those points back, up to 1 million points back per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
Expedia and Visit Scotland invite you to come experience the beauty that awaits in Scotland. The sweep of wild coastlines, quiet lochs, and untamed landscapes. Fresh cuisine that feels rooted in the land. Come experience the kind of stillness that stays with you long after you leave. Plan your Scottish escape today at expedia.com/Visit Scotland.
Hello and welcome to Away the podcast. It's Martin here, and we've got an episode of Roker Rewind for you today. Now, for those of you who haven't caught an episode of this before, first of all, what on earth are you doing with your life? And secondly, this is how it goes. Every week, we take a look at something to do with the history of Sunderland AFC. It could be the signing of a player, it could be a particular game, it could be how a manager handled a particular fixture, or it could be something that never ended up happening at all. So whatever it is, we're going to dive deep to tell the stories of this football club we all love. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we explored just how close Don Revie came to being Sunderland manager. And today, we are looking at how Gary Bennett became a Sunderland player. There's no Kelvin with us today, but I do have Andrew and Chris with me. And Andrew, Gary Bennett is a person who is synonymous with Sunderland Football Club now, isn't he? But the story of how he actually ended up here is one that people perhaps don't really know too much about. But it does provide the context and the backstory for what follows over the next 40-odd years, doesn't it?
It does. For me, always, the Gary Bennett story started the day he scored on his debut for us against, must have been Peter Shilton.
It was.
So,
yeah. McMenemy, Southampton.
Exactly, yeah. That's always how, whenever I've learnt about Gary Bennett, it's always been from that starting point. But of course, he's had a career before then, and the actual transfer to Roker Park didn't run as smoothly as it could have done. So yeah, we thought we'd have a little bit of a look and see how Gary Bennett, this absolute icon of Sunderland and this massive figure in Sunderland's history, not just as a player, but now as a trusted analyzer and commentator, thought we'd have a little look and see where it all began.
And Chris, I think I'm right in saying that Gary Bennett scored the winner on your Roker Park debut, isn't he? So he's obviously been around the football club as long as you have.
Yes, well, hello, gents, for a start. And yeah, I've got a bone to pick with Gary Bennett. It was all his fault. 30-odd years of pain or whatever, all caused by Gary Bennett. Yeah, because my first time at Roker Park was in that summer leading up to that first division season when Sunderland played Barcelona in the Youth Cup final at Roker Park. And I think we got beat 2-0 from memory. And I was standing in the full end for the first time during that summer. I always remember it was around that time because my parents were a bit kind of worried with what happened at Hillsborough and all that sort of stuff. And we'd just taken the fences down only a couple of years before and all that. So they were slightly worried. And I was only kind of 6 or 7, I think, at the time. So then the following season, I got my first game against, I tried to go to the Spurs game, actually. But by the time we got there, it was a lockout. I was standing outside and I'd gotten my new gold card and I was all excited. And everyone had gotten there earlier than me, so fair play to them. But then did get to go to the Manchester United game, and like I said, I remember thinking even then it was really strange because Man United weren't the Man United that we went on to kind of know under Alex Ferguson, and they were beatable. I think they were only finished sixth or something the season before. But even then, Gary always put us ahead, and you thought they're going to get us, they're going to get back into it, and they equalised. Brian McClare, I think, from memory, and then last minute, because I was in the main stand paddocks, and last couple of minutes, and Gary Bennett is, and we'll repeat this time and time again probably. He is in a position where he shouldn't have been. On the left wing in the last minute against Manchester United at home. Dennis Smith was probably tearing his hair out, telling them to get back, and Gary Bennett completely ignoring him. And yeah, he flicks it over. I think he flicks it over Gary Pallister's head.
Gary Pallister, yeah.
And just it lands, and he doesn't thrash at it, for centre halves or something like that in that position. And evokes memories of Gaza in Euro '96, doesn't it? That sort of thing. And he coolly, with the side foot, just curls it past, and I want to say Les Seedy was in goal for them that day.
Yeah.
And curls it past him into the far corner. And I'm looking at a signed picture of that right now, where I'm recording this, of him stroking the ball home. And yeah, you can just see that how he's doing it with the side foot. He's not thrashing at it or anything. And I see, at being that age, I was a bit gullible. So I'm thinking now Sunderland are well, of course we know they're the greatest side in the world, but I thought it was actually a reality at that point. Because we'd started the season so well, drawn against Spurs and then beaten Man United. I thought this supporting Sunderland thing was easy. So the next few decades of pain, I'm gonna blame Gary Bennett for it.
It's quite ironic, isn't it? We were talking before we started recording, Chris, and that photo of Benno stroking the ball home for that winner. And you said if you zoomed out a little bit, you'd be at the bottom of the paddocks there.
Yep.
If you zoomed out a little bit more and you had some Southampton-like binoculars, you'd be able to see me in the seats just above there. That was my first season ticket. We got seats for that season, responding to that famous "buy your season ticket now" advert that was on Tyne's TV. But for Benno, that was obviously, we played against Spurs on the Tuesday night, I think, which he was sat outside and I was in the ground. That was such a good, that was the first time I'd experienced Roker Park with a really, really big crowd in it. It was white hot. Gazza and Gary Lineker were returning from Italia 90. They'd obviously been stars of the show over in Italy that summer. And it was just fantastic. That opening spell to the first division was fantastic. But for Gary Bennett, he signed for the club in 6 years beforehand as a first division player. He'd wanted to come to a club in the first division. This was the first time since that first season he'd actually played first division football. He'd been in the second division, third division, back up, a lot of the time as captain. And that whole journey, Andrew, started a decade or more previously at Manchester City, hadn't it?
It had, yeah. Manchester City was his hometown club. He'd grown up in Manchester. His parents had been from Jamaica. He was one of 6 kids, including his brother Dave, who we mentioned a few times in this. But he never actually got to play for Manchester City's first team. He was always on the fringes. So Manchester City released him and he ended up at Cardiff City. Funnily enough, I hadn't really made this connection, but Cardiff, like Sunderland, he joined them in Division 2, but then ended up playing in Division 3 for them. So in his early years as a pro footballer, he's seen a lot of ups and downs. As I say, Manchester City was his hometown club. He wasn't from Moss Side himself, but he had family who lived in Moss Side, so he spent a lot of time there as a kid. And he's now part of the Sunderland community. But throughout his early career, he always went back to Manchester in his spare time, went back in his summer. And even whilst at Sunderland, lads, I dare say you'll remember stories about him, quote, disappearing in Moss Side for a period when Dennis Smith didn't quite know where he was.
No, that's right. And it's funny, isn't it? You have this perception of Gary Bennett now, quite rightly, because of all of the work he's done off the field. He was Sunderland captain. He's obviously a very respected commentator on BBC Radio Newcastle. But as a player, as Chris said, on the field, he used to get out of possession every now and again and go striding up and be a bit of a maverick. And he was kind of like that off the field as well, wasn't he? But when you look back at his Man City time, before he got released and went to Cardiff, that youth team he was part of, it was bloody impressive. I think they reached 2 consecutive FA Cup youth finals, or FA Youth Cup finals. He played alongside Alex Williams, I think, who was Man City's goalkeeper in the mid-80s and went to Port Vale after that.
Alex
Clive
Williams,
Wilson.
MBE, as well as like
Oh,
Gary.
really?
Yep.
Ah, there you go. Clive Wilson was a full-back for Chelsea and QPR, among others. A lad called Steve McKenzie. I remember him playing for Charlton in top flight. And Tommy Caton was a Manchester City defender. I think he died very, very young, Tommy Caton, but he was a first-team regular for Man City. So there was a lot of good players around that youth system. And you say Dave Bennett got a lot of chances at Man City. I think he played, didn't he, in the cup final in 81. But Gary Bennett, Chris, never got a sniff, and he'd obviously gone to seek some first-team football after he got released.
Yeah, well, he talked a little bit about this. We did a podcast with him. I want to say last November, from memory. It might not have been, but whenever it was, check it out if you type in Gary Bennett and How We Are the Podcast. He talked a little bit about this because I think of course he's done loads of work for Sure Racism, the Red Card, and he's been a fantastic campaigner, which is obviously one of the reasons he's got his rewards in terms of the MBE. But at that time, as you said, not only did they have a fantastic youth team in general, but Manchester City had a fantastic, I suppose, record at that time, because compared to other youth systems, of just how many black players they brought through. And they were bringing through that time. Like, I think you mentioned a few of them there, because obviously Dave Bennett was a couple of years older than Gary, so he came through. He came through a little bit earlier. But there was, as you said, Alex Williams, who I think and I'm going from memory of this, I'm pretty sure he was the first black goalkeeper to play in the top flight or in the Football League. I can't remember. I'm sure he was something like that, because he broke down a lot of barriers, Alex Williams.
Yeah,
and then of course there was Dave Bennett, Roger Palmer as well. Roger Palmer, who came through Manchester City, and absolutely legend at Oldham. I think he's Oldham Athletics record goal scorer of all time. But by the way, if you ever get a couple of minutes, because obviously doing these things, you go down rabbit holes, check out Where Is Roger Palmer and start reading about it, because he just sounds like an unbelievable fella who's just, I mean, they're talking about one game he scored an equaliser for Man City against Manchester United in the FA Cup. It was 3-3 and he scored the equaliser. And because of the type of clothes he wore, he had his football boots and a brown paper bag, walked out the back door and got the bus home. Nobody recognised him. But yeah, anyway, there was Roger Palmer. Then a few years behind them, there was likes of Earl Barrett, and the Beckford brothers weren't far behind them. So he came through in that environment. And I think Manchester City were fantastic at that time. I think it was Malcolm Allison who was manager at that time, and he was bringing through all of these players in Manchester City. You talk about 10, 15 years later, Manchester United being the ones who brought all those young players through. At this time, it's Man City. And I'm sure Paul Molden as well was one of those in that youth team, I think, as well. So they were bringing through all these players. And Gary talked about saying that, and you wouldn't be surprised by this at all, but he was brought in as an attacking player. So he's originally a midfielder, or he wanted to be a midfielder anyway. And I think what he said was, and the coaches there at the time just saw how strong he was, how quick he was, and they just went, "You're a centre half." I'm not entirely sure how much he wanted to be, because the way he played, he never. I think it was the last thing he wanted to do was be stuck at the back. He wanted to bring the ball out and get involved. But yeah, and they brought all those players through, and not just brought them through and chucked them in, but they said, well, you're this. They had the coaches to see what their attributes would be best at. And but yeah, as Dave came through, and you said, I think he played like 50, 60 games or whatever for maybe a bit more for Manchester City. Gary didn't really get a look in, did he?
No, he didn't, but he went to Cardiff, Andrew, and he really established himself there, didn't he?
He did, yeah. Cardiff was a big move. It's interesting, some of the things you say in there about Malcolm Allison and what have you. John Bond took over as manager of Man City and didn't necessarily fancy Gary Bennett, whereas previous managers had been keen to blood young players. So he was a bit of a victim of circumstance not playing at Man City. He went to that famous 1981 FA Cup final when his brother played, and that is crazy to think that two brothers have appeared in multiple cup finals between them. Gary Bennett was returning there himself to Wembley as a player a few years later. After being released by Man City, he did have a bit of a period of, I'm in trouble here. Am I going to drift out of the game? Because he doesn't join Cardiff until the 1981-82 season has started. And crucially, the player that recommends him to the Cardiff manager, Richie Morgan, is Tony Buck, who had been one of the coaches at Man City and had been part of that environment where young players were brought through and encouraged. So that was crucial to Gary Bennett ending up at Cardiff. He does, in his autobiography, which is brilliant, by the way. If anybody hasn't seen a copy of Gary Bennett's football scrapbook, by all means get hold of that. He does admit that he wasn't sure where his life was going to go, but he very quickly settles in terms of playing at Cardiff. In only his second game for them, they beat Norwich, and Gary Bennett in the papers is described as winning everything. So he very quickly adapts to being a senior player. Unfortunately, and lads, we've seen this loads of times, Morgan, the manager that brought him in, moves. He goes into like an upstairs role at Cardiff, and that is not good for a young lad, is it? If you're trying to settle at a new club and the manager who's put faith in you and given you a debut, if he's no longer in charge, that's gonna make things difficult for you, isn't it?
It certainly is. And you see it so often, don't you? When players change clubs and signed by one manager, and then it all changes. Somebody else comes in. You never know who's going to be fancied by which manager. I think when you read all the stories about Benno at the time as well, he was still doing that journey back to Manchester every weekend, and it was obviously a time he got settled to some extent on the field as a first team footballer, but as a person, how much he got settled immediately, you kind of think probably not as much.
Comcast is delivering extraordinary experiences in live sports. Through the incredible broadcast and storytelling from NBC, innovative and personalized viewing features on Xfinity and Peacock, and the country's most reliable Wi-Fi, viewers can enjoy every game-changing play faster and more seamlessly than ever. All on a network built to deliver unforgettable moments as close to live as possible. The ultimate experience for the American sports fan. Learn more at ComcastCorporation.com/sports.
AI is moving fast across the enterprise. But without visibility, it's just chaos. Different tools, different models, different teams using AI in completely different ways. ServiceNow turns that chaos into control. With the AI Control Tower, you see all your AI across the business in one place. What it's doing, what it's done, and what it's about to do. So you stay in control. To put AI to work for people, visit servicenow.com.
I think that's very fair. Again, he admits himself being in a new environment, was a little bit unusual to him. And as well, his brother ended up signing for Cardiff as well. And that was a bit of a shock, because whereas Gary had not played senior football, his brother had. His brother had played in that cup final. He had a good standing behind him, a bit of a reputation. And again, it was a shock when Man City let him go. They sold him for a bit of money, but people hadn't maybe necessarily expected Dave Bennett to drop down to Cardiff. And in one respect, it probably helped Gary that his brother was there. But in another respect, it wasn't the best thing, because they were getting into all sorts of scrapes. You know, there was, Martin, you were telling a story earlier where there was a trip back from Manchester where there was a bit of confusion over a hire car, and they got into bother over that. And I was reading in his autobiography, unfortunately, there was a racist undertone to this, but the pair of them were asked to leave a social club in Cardiff. So they were getting themselves in the headlines off the pitch, and I don't know if that really was as good for Gary as you would imagine. What then helps him is his brother moves on. He has to stand on his own 2 feet, and this is crucial in the whole Gary Bennett universe. Len Ashurst comes to Cardiff and becomes manager. Now, Len Ashurst, we've spoken about him in the past. He is second in the all-time appearance list for Sunderland. No other outfield player has played as many times as Len Ashurst. Fifth on that list ends up being Gary Bennett, which is just these two have a really close relationship for a few years, and it's amazing that Gary Bennett, who we all see now as this, this cool bloke who just looked awesome in a Sunderland shirt and who has helped race relations in the town. I mean, the guy's fought back from prostate cancer. Everybody loves Gary Bennett in Sunderland. I think he's this legend. On top of that, on the pitch, there's only 4 people who've played more times for the club, and one of them was the manager who brought him to Sunderland, which I think's a nice little quirk even.
Well, just a couple of things, actually. Again, rabbit holes. If you look at that Tony Buck that you were talking about, Martin, I mean, his kind of career at Manchester United was, Manchester City, football there, for any Manchester United or City fans. Yeah, but he was caretaker manager of Manchester City 3 times over a 20-year period, and he was manager of them for 5 years in the 70s. But the other thing was that move with Dave Bennett, just to bring up a little bit of Sunderland link into it, was the fact that Man City bought Martin O'Neill. And then Dave Bennett left to go to Cardiff. But you do look at it exactly right, Andrew, what you were saying, or I can't remember, it might have been you, Martin, in terms of him dropping down, because Dave Bennett was a top flight player. And you do wonder if that transfer for Dave Bennett was all about, well, Gary's going to Cardiff, I'll go and join him. And because back then, there was probably a financial difference, but it wasn't, you're not talking about the astronomical difference of today.
No.
So, that if he went to say, I'll go to Cardiff for a year or 2 and have a laugh with Gary and enjoy myself, and me and him will go down, bit of an adventure, it wasn't as big as a step down as it maybe would have been in today's game with the financial kind of rewards of the Premier League.
But very possibly.
I think when you look at the difference between the first division, second division, even third division in the 80s, certainly up until the end of the 80s and even the early 90s, there wasn't actually that much difference, either in standard to some extent, and certainly in terms of money. Like, players used to drop down in the second division, see Benno here getting relegated with Cardiff, playing the season quite happily in the third division. He stayed with us in the third division when we got relegated in 87, didn't he? So there wasn't that, as marked a difference between the Premier League now, where you've got to be in the Premier League, and if you're not in there, you're not on the radar, you're not a real player, all that sort of stuff as Premier League can kind of appear.
Just Steve Bull being
Well,
in England scored in, what was it, the 4th division?
well, that's absolutely right. And you look at this period of time, right? The FA Cup was probably the biggest game of the season. You'd have a strong argument to say it was the biggest honour domestically you could win. People might say the title would be. I think the two of those were looked at in pretty level pegging in terms of the biggest accolade you could win, the biggest achievement you could get. The FA Cup final was certainly the biggest game domestically of the football calendar. And in there, Dave Bennett set up that Tommy Hutchinson equaliser in the Spurs Man City Cup final, and he won a penalty in the replay. So this is a player, and again, these are days where there wasn't a great deal of football on TV. So these are days that people watch, remember performances, players, incidents that people remember across football because they are so rare to watch a game of that magnitude. So Dave Bennett was a household name, really, among football supporters at this point. And to go down to the second division to join Cardiff, to join his brother, it's quite an unusual thing, really, when you look back on it in modern terms.
Well, just that cup final, because you mentioned Hutchinson's, but of course he supplied that cross for the classic Keith Ouchin goal, didn't he? The diving header.
In the 87, he did, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No,
he's well, and he took in the FA Cup final. Then obviously Benno played for us in '92, didn't he, in the cup final?
yeah. It's I mean, that little thing there, his parents must be pretty proud, Between them the two boys have got 3 cup finals. There's a Milk Cup final in there for Gary Bennett as well. It's some going, particularly like you say, when cup finals were the big flagship event in the sports calendar back then. That was interesting what you said, Chris, about Martin O'Neill being brought in by Manchester City. Again, it just speaks to a shift in the culture there. They're letting young players, young prospects move on, and they're trying to bring in older, wiser heads, perhaps. So maybe that was happening at Man City, and again, Gary Bennett was a victim of that change in attitudes. He's at Cardiff. Len Ashurst has turned up. As I say, it's a fascinating quirk that Len Ashurst is one of Sunderland's record appearance makers, and in time, Bennett becomes one of those as well. This is another huge step up in Gary Bennett's career. He's already admitted to a couple of times wondering if his career was drifting away. He's made a few appearances for Cardiff. He's done well in them, but it's under Ashurst, who of course was a defender himself, that he really becomes a first-team regular. Cardiff very quickly get relegated under Len Ashurst, but it's one of those where he's brought in too late to save them. The following season, they get promoted straight away from the 3rd tier. Gary Bennett is a regular. He's one of the first picks, one of the first names on the team sheet. Len Ashurst really seems to like him. He gets 8 goals in that promotion season, and there's lots of mentions of him being happy on the ball, being a player who roams, that type of thing. This is all starting to become the Gary Bennett we know. We have already talked about Chris's brilliant memories about Gary Bennett scoring a fantastic goal. But when your central defender is popping up on the left wing, that is quite rare. So Gary Bennett is becoming this player that we would recognise.
And also, Andrew, sorry, I think it's important to say as well for people who are listening to this who didn't see Gary Bennett play in the flesh, that those sort of centre halves bringing the ball out and getting involved in the build-up play, they're quite common now, aren't you? See, even Dan Ballard's doing it now, and Alderete does it for us, and 09's done it in previous seasons. When Gary Bennett was playing these days, defenders. You held your position, you were in position, you were at the back, and the managers didn't really encourage the defenders to kind of even overplay because the school of thought was defenders couldn't play football in the main. And obviously, as a former centre half yourself, Chris, you'll probably agree with that. So you've got you got this situation where Gary Bennett's a real outlier in how he plays football as a defender. He'd probably be much more suited to playing football now because of his touch and his ability on the ball and his desire to take risks sometimes. But it was very unusual back in those days. And as you say, Andrew, when you pick through the match reports of his time at Cardiff, he'd be playing on the right-hand side of midfield some games. He even played up front on a few occasions, which was kind of a relief that wasn't just an aberration of Dennis Smith's at Cambridge and was actually a thing that had happened before, and maybe not too successfully. But you're right, he did really make his name as a centre half, and a very good one.
Definitely, yeah. He was becoming a much talked about player. 1983, 84, Cardiff are back in the second tier, and Gary Bennett is one of their better performers. Unfortunately for him, though, a potential bump in the road in March sees Len Ashurst move. Len Ashurst goes back to Roker Park. He's this well-known, much-loved former player, and then he's being poached by the club to return as manager. This could have been another crossroads in Gary Bennett's career, but as Len Ashurst's clearing out his office, he calls Bennett in for a chat that proves crucial. He tells Gary Bennett that as soon as he has his feet under the table, he'll be coming back in for Gary Bennett and looking to bring him to Sunderland, which must just make you feel 10 foot tall. If you're a player in the second division and a manager is leaving to take a job in the first division and is saying, hey, by the way, son, you'll be coming with us, that's a huge vote of confidence.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I think you've got to remember about his time at Cardiff, he's come through at Manchester City, not played a game, not made it, not burst into the. He's not someone, I suppose like maybe his brother did, maybe burst onto the scene as a young'un and all that. Gary Bennett didn't do that. He hasn't had that moment at Manchester City, and he moves to Cardiff when he's about 20. So he's not this 17, 18-year-old who's on the cusp of kind of bursting through and making this big impression. He's 20 years old. And I think one of you said it earlier on, where at the time, it's probably still in the balance. What type of career is he going to have? Is he still got it? Has he got a football career? But obviously Cardiff wanted him and bought him in the second division. So he's tried to make it as a first division player at a first division club, not made it, had to drop down to the second division. And then you've got to now prove yourself. And as you said, Andrew, he joins towards the end of the season when Cardiff get relegated to the third division. So he's starting to drop down the football pyramid. But at the same time, he's learning his trade. So as a 21-year-old, he's learning his trade. And as you said, Martin, defending then was a big centre half who stuck an elbow in your face and give you a kick and you'd come off battered and bruised. You played against the likes of your Billy Whitehursts of the world and all of that. So you come off in some pain. So he's learning his trade as a 21-year-old in the second and third division. Interestingly, talked about his attacking style. He scored 8 league goals in that third division season for Cardiff. So and he's got that perfect perfect role model, like you said, with Len Ashurst playing all those games. He knows his stuff, so he's knocking them into shape. The other thing as well, talking about sliding doors and everything, because years previous, we'd tried to get Len Ashurst out of Newport when he was manager of them, and he wouldn't take the job, ended up at Cardiff, and then eventually takes the Sunderland job, and by this time he's got Gary Bennett in his team.
No, that's right. And I think, again, at that point, you talk about his age when he joined Cardiff and his lack of professional football up until that point. But sending young players out on loan wasn't a thing. Back in those days, you didn't have that loan system to send players down the league, did you? So Bennett had to go and drop down a division to get some experience, and he obviously ended up dropping down 2 divisions. Andrew, you talked about Len Ashurst having the chat with Gary Bennett before he left Ninian Park, as it would have been, to say, look, once I get my feet under the table at Roker Park, I'm going to come back in for you. There was 2 players of Cardiff in that meeting.
Yeah.
And the other one did end up playing for Sunderland eventually, but he wasn't signed by Len Ashurst, was he?
Don't worry. I'd picked up on that, and we'll touch on him later. Andy Dibble, who, when he did come to Sunderland later on in the decade, by which point Len Ashurst had long gone, was really good for us. And I think Sunderland were desperate to make a loan deal permanent for him. But that's quite interesting because, he says a similar thing to Andy Dibble, that he wants to bring Andy Dibble to Roker Park. That doesn't happen. I'm assuming because when he gets to Roker Park and he realises he's got Chris Turner and he realises he hasn't got much money in the bank to play with, he can't afford to bring Andy Dibble along for the ride as well. This, Chris used the phrase sliding doors. This summer is a huge sliding door moment for Gary Bennett, because there's so many moments where the deal could collapse and he doesn't come to Sunderland and he doesn't go on to become this person that we all recognise now. During that summer, he's been told by Len Ashurst, I'll be coming in for you, stay by your phone. So that summer, Gary Bennett does as he's told. He goes back to Manchester again and waits and waits and waits for the phone call. It doesn't, however, happen initially. And right at the point of him thinking he's going to sign for Crystal Palace, he gets a phone call.
Right. On that note, while Gary Bennett is waiting for the phone to ring and dreaming of a 1998 romantic comedy featuring Gwyneth Paltrow, we're going to wrap it up for this week. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Chris. And we will be back next week for part 2 of the story about how Gary Bennett became a Sunderland player. We'll see you then.
Bar and restaurant owners, fans are already choosing where to watch on Sundays. Make sure it's your place. NFL Sunday Ticket gives you every live out-of-market Sunday afternoon game and is only available for your business through EverPass. More games, more reasons to choose your bar, more reasons to come back every week. Be the place fans choose. Only on EverPass.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Selling your car should feel like one less thing on your list, not one more. With Carvana, it is. Just go to Carvana.com, enter your license plate or VIN, and get a real offer down to the penny. No back and forth, no surprises, just an experience you can trust. Like your offer? Accept it. Schedule pickup, and we'll come to you with a check in hand. Your car, your timeline, your terms. Visit Carvana.com to sell your car today.
Carvana.
Delivery fees and terms may apply.